Norm Macdonald is the kind of comedian who knows how to keep you on edge. If you've ever watched his stand-up, if you remember him being on Saturday Night Live, you've experienced that sort of uncomfortable feeling when Norm says something so bizarre or something so beautiful, and all he can really do is laugh. I mean, just check this one out.
A new study found that men with beards are more attractive than men without beards. More great work from the University of Bob Seger.
Yeah. Yeah, you know? You see what I mean? He's absurd, man. He's unpredictable. He's incredible. And as a person, Norm is kind of unknowable. I mean, ask any talk show host. It's hard to get a straight answer from him. And his new book doesn't really help. It's called Based on a True Story, a memoir. And, you know, while Norm's really funny, we talked really kind of deeply about whether being real is overrated. So, Norm, you have a new book out. It's based on a true story, a memoir. I got that in the right order. It covers key moments in your life, growing up here in Ontario, going on Saturday Night Live, and so many people want to hear the stories, you know, the stories of getting hired, the stories of not getting hired, the stories of growing up in Ontario. But in this book, you kind of tell them as half-truths, and then you make up stories around them. So I guess I want to know, why didn't you want to write a traditional memoir? Why did you want to make some of these stories up?
Well, because I read a lot of memoirs, and they all were horrible. And then, I mean, as it turns out, like, anything backstage is just by nature inferior to anything that's on stage, and backstage is just eating sandwiches, trying to figure out what to do on stage. So I wanted the book to be I wanted the book to be its own on stage and have nothing to do with the backstage of some other medium. I wanted it to be a book.
One thing I see as a and forgive me for being presumptive or presumptuous, is that I see a distinction between your love of show business and your love of celebrity. So, like, you seem to really like the construct of show business, people getting on stage and telling jokes, you know, late night talk shows, you know, radio, the forms of entertainment you seem to have a lot of respect for. However, it does seem like celebrity is something you eschew, like something you're not as fond of. So what's the difference there for you?
Well, just that celebrity is empty and vapid, and you know, we need no better example nowadays than all the example we have nowadays. So it's reached a point where people, you know, listen, it's like Andy Warhol said, in the future everyone will be Colonel Sanders for 15 minutes. You know?
I also like when you said like Andy Williams said, everyone will be famous for 25 minutes.
Did I say Andy Williams?
You said that to
Letterman
one time, yeah. It was yeah, I know.
Letterman likes old-timey references.
He does. But you do, speaking of Letterman, like, you have a lot of respect for those old comics. You have a lot of respect for Letterman, for Rodney Dangerfield, for George Carlin, Bob Hope. And you have a lot of time for comedians that came before you, or maybe you watched when you were coming up. But I'm interested. Yes. I know it's a big question, but how do you feel about comedy now?
Well, I remember there was a comedian named Robert Klein, and he said that when he started out in New York, there was 100 comics, and only 5 were funny, and then there was 500 comics, and only 5 were funny. Right. So he thought 500 was a huge amount, but now there's 50,000, and there's only 5 that are funny, because it just does not work by supply and demand. You know, you can't create art because you need art. So it doesn't, you know, just because you need more paintings doesn't mean there's going to be a million great painters. So naturally it's going to be worse, and the audience doesn't seem to know the difference. As long as the structure is there and the craft is there, you know, anyone can learn it, the same way you could learn chords on a guitar, you know. And you can trick the audience pretty simply.
Trick them how?
Well, I was going to write a book, but then I thought it would be too dangerous. But I was going to write a book like how to become a stand-up without being funny at all. Because those are the most of the stand-ups I've ever seen. Like I talked to them off stage, and I'm like, did anyone ever tell you the funniest guy, like in the room, in the lunchroom,
Yeah.
let alone like
Okay.
that you dared to do this, such a presumptuous thing as to stand on stage. But what they did was they learned tricks. And I started to realize, because I started at Yuck Yucks, and I'd go across the country, and it was sort of the start of the boom. And I'd go, that guy looks familiar, that opener. And they'd go, he used to be the bouncer. I'm like, what? And then it turned out the bouncer would just watch from the back of the room and just, either consciously or otherwise pick up on how to, on techniques of crowd control and saying certain things that made audiences applaud, or, just a number of different tricks that you can use in lieu of actual comedy.
You also say in the book. Sorry, Norm. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go on.
I had nothing to say, just fluff.
I don't.
Because you weren't speaking, so I felt I had to.
But that's a trick. That's a trick, right? That's a
Is
trick.
that
'cause
an
we're-
interviewer's trick?
No, like when we're not in person. Yeah, that's a thing. Like I don't talk. Hopefully that And sometimes it works because I'm not entirely sure what to say next either. And I go, I'm going to give him 15 seconds here, and hopefully.
Oh, I can see. So you just throw the rope. You just throw the lucid rope.
And it makes me sound so contemplative, Like it makes me sound like he's really pondering and considering what Norm's about to say. But I do have something to say. Norm, you seem to have like a gold standard of what a comic should be. Like, you say things like, well, like you're not going to be as funny as this. You're not going to be as good as that. Like the greatest comic in the world is not necessarily going to be that. Like I know it's a big question, but like in your craft, like what's your ideal comic? Who's your ideal comic?
Rodney Dangerfield would probably be my ideal comic, or Richard Pryor might be my ideal comic, depending on the type of comic that they are.
Why?
But well, because they're the best at. It's very hard to be. It's very hard to be considered naturally funny, which is just a nonsensical phrase. But it's used as a sort of a put down in some ways, that the person could read a phone book or something. Of course, no one could read a phone book and be funny, but it's just that they're so good they don't look good. So, on the other hand, if you have someone like Bill Hicks, who's just this fraud that screams at the top of his lungs and tells you that, multinational oil companies are not a good thing, then that will attract a wide audience of, half smart college kids or whatever, But to truly conceal everything, like somebody like Bob Hope would do, then he becomes vilified, somebody like Bob Hope, because it looks like he's doing nothing, which is, of course, the magic of it,
And who's he talking to? You said that. I know I was probably supposed to give you space there, but you mentioned an audience of half smart college kids. And Norm, earlier in the interview, you talked about how you don't really do comedy for anyone but yourself. You don't worry too much about the reaction from the audience. However, you talk about Bob Hope and Rodney Dangerfield, and the reaction mattered a lot to them.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much it meant to them.
Well, they did it for they seemed to legitimately be concerned with entertaining the audience.
Oh yes. But no, when I do a gig for, sometimes people confuse what I do for no money and what I do for money. Like if I,
what's this one?
Well, like I'm not being insanely funny now because it's not the purpose of what I'm doing, But if I do stand up at a comedy club, I will throw away jokes that don't work. I would not keep doing the joke only because I liked it. I just mean the creation of the joke is aimed at me. I don't know how it's possible to, I know how it's possible, but it's a bad idea to go, well, what does the audience think? And then I'll start there, So I'll start with Trump's an idiot. And then you just end with Trump's an idiot too. That becomes the entire point of what you say. And so it's just empty, and they knew that before they showed up. You know, so it's not like I would ever, in front of an audience, deliberately do a joke that I know would not get a reaction. Now, I've done stuff on television before where I've experimented with joke structures, and I did that on Weekend Update, and I did that other places on television.
Mm-hmm.
But that was for my own consideration, because oftentimes, you know, I would be getting like $500 for the appearance, you know, let's say on a talk show or something. So I go, well, let me try something here, because I know I'll be just as good as the girl talking about her third swimming pool.
Yeah, or the Melrose Place. The moth joke is a good example of that, Norm, because if like you go into, you tell a really beautiful version of the moth joke, and if you're listening to this, by the way, this is Norm Macdonald talking about his new book based on a true story, a memoir. My name's Tom Power. You're listening to Q. I should have said this about 10 minutes ago, and I didn't, and my producer's now waving his arms in the air, thanking me for doing that. So you do tell the moth joke in the book. You told it on the Tonight Show with Conan back when he was doing the Tonight Show. It was it's a long kind of joke, and just a few months ago, maybe about a year ago, it kind of got revived online, and people were putting it up online, calling it the best telling of a joke ever on television. But Norm, that seemed to me like you were experimenting there. You were trying to experiment with. You knew the punchline, and you knew the beginning of it, and you knew it was a pretty straightforward street joke, but you wanted to experiment with how to get from one point to another.
Yeah, it was both an experiment and it was an experiment born of necessity, because Conan told me I had to do a second spot, which he'll sometimes do. But I said, I don't have anything else to say. I have nothing left to tell you. And so then I thought of this joke that Colin Quinn had told me, this street joke.
A moth goes into a podiatrist's office, and the podiatrist's office says, "What's the problem?" And the moth says, "What's the problem? Where do I begin, man?" He goes, "I go to work for..."
That was just a two-line joke. It was just a one-liner times two. So then I thought, well, how can I do I started thinking during the commercial, is it possible to do a one-liner for an entire 6-minute segment? So I thought, if I can put in between this very a little boy's joke, just a set of horrifying facts laid end to end, then it could make the sweetness way funnier at the end, because they'll have completely forgotten where I was. And so it ended up working by fluke, like often things will when you're experimenting.
He says, "Doc, sometimes I feel like a spider, even though I'm a moth, just barely hanging on to my web with an everlasting fire underneath me. I'm not feeling good." And so the doctor says, "Moth, man, you're troubled. But you should be seeing a psychiatrist. Why on earth did you come here?" And then the moth said, "Because the light was on."
And then what happens with the computer is that people put things on the computer, and they live forever. And you were talking about the Melrose Place thing, which I did with Courtney Thorne Smith, where I was just
Yeah, just for context, if you're listening to this, this is a kind of a legendary late night moment where Courtney Thorne Smith is the second guest on Conan after Norm. She's in a new movie with Carrot Top called Chairman of the Board. I hope you don't mind me laying that joke for you, Norm. So she's in a new show, and Norm calls it box office poison. And then she
just went on.
And Conan says, "No, she's in the show." And then Courtney Thorne Smith says, "Yeah, I'm in the show." And Norm says, "Well, no, I'm sure you're a very good talk show guest." And then she says, "No, the movie's called Chairman of the Board." And Conan says, "Let's see you do something with that." And you say,
I bet the board is spelled B-O-R-E-D.
Yeah.
What was funny about that was before computers. So then you would just say something, and it would just go out into the ether, and people would go, "Remember that thing?" And the other guy would go, "No." And they go, well, I don't either. But nowadays, it exists forever. And I don't even know if I would do that joke now. But anyways, now I'll go on talk shows and, I'll go on first and then they'll always go like, the next guy that comes, just say anything you want, And then they'll warn the second guest. They'll go, Norm might attack you at any moment, but that's not what I do. So, like, sometimes you'll see a guest will come out and then, like, peremptorily attack me for no reason at all. So I just don't say
being
anything.
Unnecessarily hostile to you.
Yeah, I don't. If that ever happens, I never say anything. So it just seems sort of odd to the audience that Thomas Hayden Church is like attacking me out of the blue.
Is there a difference? Is there a difference in how you prepare yourself for going on a late night show now than you did back in the 90s?
Yeah, I try to resist going anywhere towards expectation of the. What I started to do very early on, which could have got me knocked off talk shows forever, but I did not understand that when you went on a talk show, that you had to tell a producer the stories that you were going to tell on the talk show, and then the producer would go and tell the host. And then you would have to tell the host the same story that he's just heard. Like,
we don't have that here. We don't have the money at the CBC for that.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So then, of course, the host has all these, comebacks in his pocket and stuff, So anyways, the second time I did it on the Late Night with David Letterman show, I said, I'll just make up a whole, thing. So I just told the producer a secondary bunch of funny stories. And then I didn't do them. So then let David Letterman go, I understand you have a cat. And I go, I got no cat. But I was just in Michigan. And then he got a kick out of that. And he goes, so you don't have a cat. I like you keep that going for the entire. Because he knew that I was just going to talk to him. So then after that, he just let me do whatever I'd want to do. And Conan, God bless him, also did the same.
Do you feel the same comfort with Fallon or Kimmel or with James Corden that you do kind of going anywhere and exploring that you did with Letterman and Conan?
Oh, no, I have complete faith in that. You're not in this, obviously these guys were masters, so it's a little bit different. Like I was talking to Howard Stern about it because I'd done Fallon, and I said, it's weird when you look over and there's a child sitting at the desk, and you're like, what? It was such a surreal thing, because you're used to this giant of a man whose hands you could sit in, and now there's a kid. So, and then Howard said something that hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. He's like, yeah, you can't be like the dopey fool, when the guy's 20 years younger than you, It's hard to. But somehow I managed to be able to do that.
Yeah. Norm, you somehow pulled it off. Norm Macdonald, thanks a lot for talking to me today.
Thank you, Tom. This is fun.
I had a great time talking to you, man.
Well, I did too, man. Maybe we'll do it again.
Norm Macdonald, by the way, the moth joke he tells, I think we cut it down to maybe 45 seconds in that, but it's 6 minutes long. It is 6 minutes long. It may be the greatest telling of a joke you'll ever see. We'll put it up on our Twitter. That's at CBC Radio Q. Norm Macdonald's new book is called Based on a True Story, a memoir. It is beautiful. Some of it's true, and some of it ain't.